Hi, I'm Annie Botticelli, and this is the Storyteller Forecast for Leo for October 2015. Go to my website, aspiritualspark.com, to see more about my current offerings and to become part of my VIP crew by signing up for my free email newsletter. What's going on for October? We've got a busy, active month in October. We are just coming off of a super busy, active month in September, and the energies from that month are still very much carrying over into October as well. So let's just take all of these piece by piece. We've got a huge concentration of personal planets in, and also some other planets, but a huge concentration of energy, we'll say, in the second house of finances, material possessions, environmental projects, sustainability, self-sufficiency on all levels, emotional, financial, environmental. The earlier degree placements also have some energy really starting to get focused in the third house. And you middle to later degree placements, although you have the second house focus, you also still have some strong first house focus. So you've got a lot of energy focused right at the bottom of the chart here between the first and the third houses, and we'll talk about that. When I think about the personal planets are the ones closest to the sun and the sun. Astrologers call everything planets, even if they're not planets, like the sun is not a planet, the moon is not a planet, but from the perspective of the chart, it's a planet. So we've got the sun, we've got the moon, we've got Mercury, Mars, and Venus. These are the planets whose rhythms move more quickly, their orbits move more quickly. So those are the ones that we look to for regular horoscopes because their positions are changing rapidly, so they bring changing areas of focus in the short term. So when we look at a horoscope, one of the things we're looking at is to see where these people, I think of them as people, are bringing certain energies. What fields of experience as humans that we have are they focused on, bringing energy to those fields of experience for the person whose horoscope we're looking at. And I think of them like, we'll say like they're friends, okay? So let's say there's the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars. So let's say there are 5 friends. And these 5 friends will sometimes get together and do things at the same time. And sometimes one is off doing something else and you talk to them and say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm over here, I'm focusing on this. And then you might say, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm focusing on this. And oh, I'm just about to do that. It's like that. So that's what's going on here. We've got this huge concentration of these friends that each bring a little bit of a different element, just like people's personalities do, to certain fields of experience. And the second house is this area where we really look at its earned income. It's money that comes in. It's your finances. There's another house, the 8th house, that we look at for certain other aspects of finances. But this is one of the big money houses. So many topics about what you're doing with your money, what you want to be doing with your money, what is valuable to you, the question of value. Where have your values been? Where are they going? What can you do to facilitate the shift into, putting your energy where your values are? You can do this exercise and you might find an interesting result. If you write down the things that are most important to you, and then you write down where you spend the highest concentration of your time and what you spend your highest concentration of your time doing, and see if it matches up. Like, let's say your family is your priority, but because you work so much, you don't spend a lot of time with your family, but you are taking care of your family from the job. But the amount of time you get to spend with your family is just this much when your family is this on your priority list. Things like that. This is a really good exercise for this focus on the second house, not just for the short term, where these personal planets that move quickly are passing and getting a lot of highlight in October. And for you middle to later degree placements, this focus is going to continue into the coming months. But also in the longer term, because Jupiter, the planet of optimism and expansion and the bringer of luck and growth, is moving through your second solar house. Now, you later degree placements or late birthday Leos, closer to the sign of Virgo, you're not going to have this happen for you yet. This is going to be, what I'm describing is going to be a little bit more into the future. If you're a middle degree birthday, you're about to start to have this happening, and the early degree placements have already had this happening over the past several months. And that is Jupiter expanding your house of finances and material possessions. I have tracked Jupiter very carefully because Jupiter is my ruling planet, and so I watch it in some cases more closely than other places. Also, even though every planet has its downside, Jupiter has a really strong upside, and it often brings a lot of magic along with it. So it's a fun place to track. And if someone is looking for where the growth is going to come and looking for good news, a lot of times we find those answers wherever Jupiter is in your chart. So from tracking this very carefully in my charts and the charts of people that I know and my clients, I have seen that it's very unusual for someone to experience Jupiter moving through your second house, as it is for some of you and as it will be for the rest of you, without having a serious increase in your income. That's good news, right? I've also seen that most people's expenses and standard of living rise to the same degree, if not more, than their new income. Okay, so this is something that you might want to keep in check, because if you have long-term financial goals and you are rising your standard of living to match your new increase in income, then you're not going to have your long-term needs served. There are a couple of other signs that I talked about, that what I'm about to talk about, because of the emphasis on the 8th house for some of the other signs. Like I said, the 2nd and the 8th house are very much related. But I really want to have this discussion with you now, because these are the kinds of questions, short and long term, that if you're not asking naturally, then it would be good for you to start asking. And most of you are probably going to naturally be asking these, because that's what the nature of the transits are bringing. And this has to do with your long-term security. I read an article that was saying that a 25-year-old, and this is no secret, anyone in the investment communities, people who have been investing money or studying money, have heard a similar example over time. I first heard this, when I was a little kid, when my dad was trying to teach me about compounding. The magic of compounding is the moral of the story. And so in this example, they were talking about if a 25-year-old were to eat breakfast at home and bring their lunch to work, like brown bag it, is what the name of the article was, then if they saved that at least $10 that they would have spent extra on going out, then, and they invested that, they would have over $1 million by the time they were in retirement age. In the example, it was around 67. So this whole way of looking at money in a different way, of thinking of a small amount of money and how it can turn into a large amount of money, is really where it's good for you to be focused on. So if your standard of living is either higher or just at what your income is, first of all, that's not sustainable. Most people that are making really good money are also knowing, like, wow, this is really stressful and is a lot of work for me, and I don't know how long I can keep this up, right? That generally tends to happen when you make more money, you're doing more things. Not always, but sometimes. So you've got to be asking the question, is this sustainable? How long can I do this for? You know, how long do I want to do this for? And making your financial decisions mold around what your longer term goals are, and using your current circumstances to fuel what you want in the future. It's a very long-term type of a placement for these short-term planets and this longer-term planet. So good news is probably you'll be making more money, but I really want to put a little pressure on you to be thinking about, like, wow, how am I spending my money? Okay, so we want you to do a budget. We want you to know how much money is going in and out, what you're spending on what. I'm sure there are apps that can monitor this for you. Whatever you have to do to get a clear picture of where money is kind of leaking away, so that you can get that worked out. Now, for those of you early placements who are starting to have some strong energy in the 3rd house, the rest of you will have what I'm about to discuss coming for you. It's just going to be staggered a little bit. Now, this idea of being staggered because of your placement, I've talked about this many times before, and it is more effort for me to track the difference between the early, middle, and late degree charts, but I just can't in good conscience not talk to you about this, because the chart of an early degree person placement is so drastically different in many cases than the late degree placements. And if I'm not speaking to this, then there's many people that won't find the pieces of resonance in the reports that could be beneficial to them. So first note is that if you are a late degree placement, so your birthday is later in the sign, so like towards the end of August, middle to end of August, if that's your birthday, or if you have like a 20 degree or later ascendant, if you're watching for your ascendant, definitely consider also watching the Virgo report, because if you listen to the early degree Virgo chart horoscope, then you're going to pick up pieces that you're not picking up in the Leo horoscope, and that can make things, astrology, much more meaningful for you and much more assistive to you. And still watch the Leo report and listen to the late degree placements as well, but both of them are going to be part of your total picture. These pictures are complex. They're not very simple. There's many layers to them. So, okay, now back to what I was saying about the third house. The third house has to do with travel, especially short distance and short-term travel, mobility, communication, transportation. All the things we talk about in Mercury retrograde as being compromised, those are the things in general that the third house rules, because Mercury, among another placement, also rules the third house. So anything you drive, any way you move yourself, you transport yourself, anything you communicate, the way you communicate, what you communicate on, your devices, there's a lot of energy that's starting to focus in this field of experience. And this is also part of how you express yourself, writing, speaking, communicating, blogging, articles, you know, anything that involves writing or sharing information with other people is very much in this third house. So for Leos, you're starting to have some very strong emphasis on how you're getting this energy out into the world. Now, this third house also rules relatives that are not your parents or children. So like cousins, aunts, uncles, relatives like that. So something important could be happening or about to happen, or maybe if you could consider purposely, since you know this, something with one of your relatives, like if a cousin or an uncle had this idea about something and you're thinking about starting a business. What comes to my mind first, my husband's very close cousin is a Leo, and they're more like brothers than cousins. And they're very synergistic with their energy. So if you have a relative like that, that really works well with you, that you really could create with and collaborate with, this energy moving into that third house might help you to spark some joint projects again, something like that. So then the rest of you are these are the early degree placements, the energy started to move there, and the rest of you, this energy is coming. So we've got a new moon for you early and middle degree placements. This new moon is actually in the third house. And that's part of the energy that I'm describing. So it's something new, it's something opening, it's a new chapter. For you late degree placements, you're having that new moon in your second house where everything else is happening, you know, so just another layer of energy of newness in a stream of income, or something financial that has been important to you, or something gelling. The second house, while it's very much about money and material things, is also very much about the earth and environmental things. So if you are a person who is very earth conscious, or very focused on finding sustainable ways of being, then all this energy could fuel projects that you have. I was completely blown away by this article that I read. It's in a natural healing magazine that's local to my area. And they were talking about in a certain area of Turkey, I did not know that Turkey was a huge exporter of pistachios, but I learned that in this article, and they were talking about how there's a lot of demand for shelled pistachios. So they shell the pistachios there, and then they ship out the shelled pistachios. So they would just put the pistachio shells in the landfill. Well, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, now you do, that organic matter gives off a lot of methane gas in its decomposition. And so that can be harnessed. That's part of why proponents of environmentally focused projects are compost, because it's good to keep that out of the landfill and use it for very productive things. But in any case, this section in Turkey that has this huge exportation of the pistachios, they're trying to put together this whole city that would be fueled on the methane gas that is made from the pistachio shells. That all of the electric energy needs of this city, which I remember that it was like 100,000 people could be in this area that they're building. They're going to do a smaller pilot first, but I'm like, oh my gosh, that is the coolest thing ever. Pistachio shells, right? So this kind of thinking, What resources do you have that could be working harder for you? What is being wasted that could be fueling your growth? Let's say, like I was talking about before with your budget, let's say you've got $10 a day that's just kind of being pissed away somewhere. That could be fueling compounding to create something bigger in the future or towards, your longer term goals. These are the kind of things that are very current for Leo. And this pistachio example, which is like totally blowing my mind and bringing me big smiles, is the example for you to hold in your heart, hold in your mind. What is your pistachio? What is your thing that you've got plenty of, either in your environment or in your home or in your way of being or in your other access that you have to resources, that you can create this magical situation of sustainability with things that were just kind of being thrown in the garbage. So we've got, at the beginning of the month, we've got quite a lot of activity with the personal planets Mercury and Venus. Venus has been like the star of this show that we've had for several months, because the end of June, Venus started its pre-retrograde shadow period. And then at the end of July, Venus went retrograde July 25th. September 6th, Venus goes or went direct, depending on when you're watching this. But there's a full month and a couple of days after it goes direct on September 6th before it regains its full steam. I always think of the retrogrades, the energy of the retrogrades, as like a car going 60 miles an hour wanting to make a U-turn. So you're cruising along at 60 miles an hour, you've got to slow down, you got to get in the left lane. You got to slow down, almost come to a complete stop, maybe a complete stop. Maybe you have to wait with cars whizzing by and you have to turn. Then as you turn and you're trying to get up to speed, there's cars coming fast and it's just awkward. That's what the energy after a planet goes direct is like. So if you have your calendar marked, even if you have the consciousness to look at these things, I'm so happy about that you're, being aware of these transits. But if you are not taking it a step further and thinking about the shadow periods, I encourage you to incorporate that into what you're looking at as well. Because if it was September 6th and you're like, okay, September 7th, I'm doing all the business and relationship and beauty related things that Horoscope said not to do just yet, I'm going to do that all now. It's September 7th, Venus is direct, right? No, because it's really fresh into its making its U-turn, and it's super awkward. So October 9th, the end of that awkward moving forward energy happens. And so now Venus retrograde energy is completely clear. But that same day, Mercury is going direct also. Okay, so Mercury retrograde shadow period started August 29th. Then September 17th is when Mercury went retrograde. And then it's retrograde until October 9th. And there's always a little more awkwardness around the several days in either direction. So a couple, 2-3 days after it goes direct, like through the 11th or 12th, it's going to be a little more active even though it's officially direct. So my recommendation is, if you can wait until around October 23rd for doing all the big things of like a big launch, big decisions, big whatever that you've been waiting all these months to do, if you can hold on a little longer, first of all, you'll be free of the Mercury shadow period. That's when it ends on the 24th. You'll be free of Venus retrograde. And you've got some super fly fantastic aspects with Venus around that time. October 23rd, Venus comes into the configuration of a trine with Pluto. Everything in astrology is mathematically based. Astrology is a science and astrology is an art. But the scientific aspect of astrology is based in math, and it has to do with the angles that the planets make to one another and the energy of those angles. And some angles carry more awkwardness and challenge, and some of them carry just like the angels are singing and the clouds are pretty and pink, and and that's what this is. That's the angels with the pink cloud whole scene. That's what Venus looks like in a trine, 120 degree, super favorable, highly positively sacred geometrical angle with Pluto. And then Jupiter is conjunct Venus a couple of days later. So this is a really sweet type of energy. And I like the 23rd and 24th a little better in some ways than the 25th, because even though that's the day that Venus and Jupiter are exact, that's also a day that Mercury is opposing Uranus. Uranus can bring jolts of news that affect you, and Mercury, or things that affect you, and then Mercury rules news. So like a jolt that comes from a piece of news or something involving your mobility, a surprise that's not as positive can come in with that energy. And it actually reminds me of something that just happened today. I have to relook and see what was going on today, maybe in my personal chart or in general, that would liken to this energy, because I just heard that Wayne Dyer passed away this weekend, and I was like, oh God, my heart stopped for a second, and it really threw me off. But that feeling of being jolted and just like rocked to your core by some piece of news that comes in is very much what Mercury in opposition with Uranus is like, but since Mercury is a fast-moving planet, often you can kind of pull it together after a couple of days, so it's not, it's a factor, but it's just something that comes in and it surprises you and it jostles you a little bit. So that's happening on the 25th also. So you've got some really good energy and you've got this other energy, and they may or may not have anything to do with each other as far as the manifestations. You could get a piece of news or see something that isn't positive, and it may not be related to the things that you're working on or launching or anything like that. So we also have the eclipse aftermath. Some of you will actually experience the eclipses and what happens after as like an aftermath, like could be a seriously traumatic event for you. Some of you will have something seriously positive happen, and some of you will have both of those things. Eclipses are just like that. But in any case, the September is a very active month where the eclipses actually happen that month. Some people will have gotten their news or started to get their news in August. Some people will just get their first time eclipse news in October. Sometimes you get the news like right after. That's something tricky about these dates too. If you do watch dates and you do keep track of those periods of time where, this is happening on this day, this is happening on this day, always remember that there's an orb of energy in either direction where you could get affected by those things. And if you just mark it on that day, then you might be missing something. Like I always talk about with full moons, I usually feel that 2 to 3 days, the full moon, my full moon freak out happens 2 to 3 days before the full moon. So when this full moon passed and the full moon freak out didn't happen, this one that we just had in Pisces and where I'm recording this, when it passed and there was no freak out, I was like, what happened? Where was the freak out? And the day after the full moon, there was the freak out, the thing that happened, and I was like, all right, because it could happen after. It doesn't usually happen after for me, so it kind of threw me off. But it's important for you to know that as you're tracking these dates, because the manifestations don't always happen on the exact date that the event happens. They're suggestions of potentials that range with varying amounts of time depending on the nature of the planets or the transits involved. So a lot of you will be regrouping from the news that came from the eclipses, and some of you will just be like, wow, this is so awesome, and I'm having to pull it together because this is so awesome. And some of you will be like, wow, that's really terrible, and having to pull it together because it was terrible, and maybe it will be both. But October is this month where we got the Venus retrograde thing kind of wearing off. We got Mercury retrograde still going on and then kind of wearing off. We've got after energies of eclipses, so all of that is still going on as we're moving through the month of October. If you have not already signed up for my free email newsletter, then definitely do that. I do a write-up for my VIP crew, my email group, and I send it out a month before, so you've got a lot of dates of different things or general themes. Sometimes they're things that I don't get to talk about in the horoscope, so they're in addition to, because there's just so much stuff to talk about. So if you want in on that, then definitely go to my website, A Spiritual Spark, and sign up for that. Also, you can check out my current offerings, and depending on when you're watching this, some of my apprentices might be starting to show up on my apprentice page, which you can see through my coaching page. And I hope that you have a wonderful month. Take good care.